Welcome to Authors Alcove. I am your host, Agnes Wolfe. Today I have Jillian Fanning. She is the author of the picture book, A Giraffe in the Forest, a Jeff and Banks adventure, which was actually a top new release in two categories, both the children's forest and the trees and mammals. Jillian is a former elementary education teacher. While teaching, she saw firsthand the joy children's books gave to her students, and she loved sharing that excitement with them. Now, as a stay-at-home mom, she wants to continue bringing that excitement to children. Her debut children's book, A Giraffe in the Forest, was released on February 6, 2024. And she actually just mentioned that she has another one coming out this summer. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And it's the beginning of her adventure as a children's book author. Today, we will be talking about the creative editing and publishing process, as well as what it's like working with an illustrator. So thank you so much for joining me today, Jillian.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Could you just share a little bit about yourself and what got you into writing children's books?
For sure. So, like you mentioned, I am a former elementary teacher and I taught fifth grade for 9 years. I absolutely loved it. It was such a fun age because the students are pretty independent, yet they still love coming to school. You can be a little sarcastic with them. And so, teaching was very special to me. And when my daughter was born in 2022, I decided to make the decision to stay home with her and leave the teaching world for a little bit. But that part of me always stayed with me. And one day, my daughter was actually playing with a stuffed bear and giraffe, and just kind of would always gravitate to these same two stuffed animals. And so one day I was just like, that's such an unlikely friendship. And then a story just kind of evolved of this giraffe getting lost in the forest and then meeting a bear and kind of starting to be a little uneasy because he's never seen this kind of animal before. He doesn't look like him. Can he trust him? Can he be friends with him? And then, befriending this bear who then goes on to teach him about the forest and then show him kind of his world and then eventually help him get back to his family. And it's so funny because like this story kind of started and I actually went for a walk and wrote it all out on my phone pages, which I don't recommend doing while you're out for a walk. I mean, I was trying to pay attention as I was walking around, but the story was just coming and so I had to get it out. So then I actually sent it to my mom, who was a former English teacher. And she's like, this is great. Like, what a cool thing for you to do. Because honestly, never before had I wanted to be like, oh, I want to be a children's book author. Like, I loved reading them to my students. I loved how engaged they got with them. I loved how into the story they got with them. But I never had thought to myself, oh, that's something I wanted to do. It was never a bucket list thing. So it was just kind of something that was based on timing. And so I had actually so I sent it off to my mom and she, gave me a couple things. And I had talked to someone else and they were like, one of the main things you should really do is get it professionally edited. And I was like, I was a teacher. My mom is a former teacher. Like, I think I'm a pretty good writer. And it was so interesting. So I did all this research, found a, children's book editor that seemed very well established and trustworthy. And I sent it off to her. And oh my gosh, she had notes out the wazoo. And I got it back and I was like, who am I kidding? Like, I can't do this. Like, obviously, this was not a good story. And my confidence just completely was shot. And so I didn't even look at it for 4 months. Just didn't even think about it, didn't look about it. And then I just started to think about her notes. And I was like, oh my gosh, she was so right. And I think it was just this ego thing for me. Like, I'd been a teacher, those kinds of things. And so I decided to check my ego at the door and kind of started to think about when I would have writing conferences with students, how they would bring up their story to me and they thought it was amazing, and we would go kind of line by line and think about how we could make it better. And yes, it had a good foundation, but how could we expand on it? And I think that's what I needed, that just time away to be like, oh, okay, she was right, And so I went back to my story, completely blank page and kind of started over again. And I wrote it all out again in one sitting and sent it back to that same editor. She had been right. And she was like, yes, this is your story, that kind of thing. And so I think having that distance away from it was actually extremely beneficial. And, you don't want your editor to be your best friend. You want them to give you honest feedback. And that's what I needed. And I think because this was such a new field for me, like I wasn't used to like getting that kind of feedback. And so that was definitely one of the learning experiences with this whole self-publishing adventure was, finding an editor who you can get great feedback from that is not going to just tell you, oh, your story's amazing, that kind of thing, because that's truly how you bring about the best version of your story.
How did you find your children's book editor? Because I feel like finding out the editors for your particular genre is sometimes kind of hard. How did you find yours?
I actually just kind of Googled like children's book editors, and I reached out to probably 4 or 5. And the one that I went with, like she had, numerous reviews from other authors, and like also had great blog posts of great information with self-publishing. And I just like, I felt very comfortable with the information she was providing. And, she got back to me right away. So I think like I just felt comfortable with what I was seeing from her and like her approach to the editing process.
So as a elementary teacher, you kind of have a specific different look on children's books. How did that shape you writing this particular book?
That's so interesting because, as a fifth grade teacher, we read some children's books, but a lot of it is more chapter books type thing. But you think about when you are working with students and reading books, and you think a lot about theme, like what is going to be this message that the students are going to learn from reading this book. And so I think with that, I really wanted to convey this message of, friendship with, people that don't necessarily look like us, and who are from different places than us. And I think sometimes when that's conveyed through animals, like kids can relate to that a little bit and see like, okay, these two animals look different. They're from two different places, yet they could befriend each other. They could learn from each other. And I think that experience of like seeing students who look different and are from different places, maybe have a hard time navigating that friendship. Whereas if they could read a book about it and see how that friendship can evolve, okay, well, maybe that's something that I can try too. So I think definitely having that experience in the classroom definitely translated into my writing as well.
Could you just share the plot of A Giraffe in the Forest?
Yeah, for sure. So Jeff is, used to the wide open savanna. And so when he goes on vacation with his family, he kind of goes off exploring. And so, like I said, he's used to the wide open savanna. So when he goes to the forest, he's not used to the dense trees. And so he gets a little bit turned around. Whereas then he meets a bear who that's his home. And Banks teaches him about the forest as they try to find his way back to his family. So he teaches them maybe what he can eat in the forest. And Jeff's never seen snow before. And, about the mountains, how they're a little bit steeper. So that not only is he meeting a new friend, but he also gets to learn about his new friend's home. And that's the thing, too, that I wanted to have with this book is not only to entertain, but if someone's never been to the forest, maybe they can learn, that a little bit more about it.
What should we expect from you in the future?
So in the end of the story, Jeff invites Banks to the savannah to come visit him and see his home. And so book 2 actually is where Banks goes and visits Jeff in the savannah. And then book 3, they actually go to a new place for both of them. So they are going to actually go to the desert. So they meet a camel that is going to then teach them about the desert. And my hope for this series is that they continue to keep going to new places where they can keep learning about new places. And so, as kids are reading these, if they've never been to the savannah, what can they learn about the savannah? What if they've never been to the desert? Those kinds of things. So each book will bring about a little bit of new learning about a new place.
I love that. As a homeschool mom, I homeschooled my oldest till she graduated from the age of like fifth grade. And then my youngest three, I've been homeschooling complete. And the one thing that I really like to do is to find books that teach about
Hmm.
different places. There's this Burgess series that follows these characters and they see all these animals and you learn about these animals through the perspective of a fox or and a bird depending on this.
Hmm.
And I just love that because it teaches them without them feeling like they're being taught to. And I
Exactly,
love
exactly.
that.
And it was really cool because I did a virtual author read to a school in Nevada. And, we were talking about the snow part, and a couple of those kids had never seen snow before. So I think getting to see, that interaction with snow is really neat for them because they've never personally experienced playing in the snow, making a snow angel, those kinds of things.
So when you originally wrote the book, did you have an idea of what Jeff and Banks look like and the scenery? Or was that something that the illustrator came up all on her own?
So the only thing that I asked my illustrator is that if Jeff could have a backpack. I just, that's what I envisioned for Jeff. And it was such a neat process in how we kind of went about figuring out how the characters would look. So she sent me like a general, like giraffe and bear. And then she like chose, she's like, okay, do you want the little knot or the little, I don't know what those are called on the top of his head, the little knobs or whatever. How do you want his tail to be? Do you want him up on all four? Do you want him on two? And then what kind of bear do you want? Do you want a brown bear, black bear? How do you want him in size proportion to Jeff? So it was such like before even any of the illustrations started, we had to like establish those characters. And then it's so funny because in my mind, I think I had an idea of what they look like, but now that this is all I can envision for how Jeff and Banks should look. She just did such an amazing job of bringing what I wanted for my giraffe and bear to life.
Thank you so much for sharing. Like, because I was actually going to ask you what were some of the early things that you talked about. But once she had actually drawn them up, what were some things that you talked about after you saw them? Were there any things that you suggested or things you didn't like and
So
that you
I
guys
gave
worked with?
her some general notes on how I would like the illustrations to look, but I also wanted to give her that creative liberty. That's her role. Like that's her gig. So I wanted to give her that freedom to kind of interpret how she would envision, and it was such a fun process because she would kind of do a general sketch, send it back to me. Okay, what are you thinking with this? And I'd send back my feedback. And so it kind of was a lot of back and forth. And we'd go through various stages of just a sketch and then kind of a rough drawing and then, adding in color. And then her last, edit was kind of adding in so those refined details and whatnot. And so, like, within each of those edits, we could kind of navigate, okay, what are you liking? What aren't you liking? And so that was such a fun process to just like, get some new illustrations in and you're like, oh, so exciting to start to see those different pages, come to life. And she was so accommodating if there was something that I was like, oh, that's not how I saw it. She was like, great, tell me how you want to see this. So it was a kind of a both of us that back and forth of just kind of figuring out what was going to be the best fit.
I actually looked up her as well. I told you a little bit about that. And I was quite impressed with what I saw. How did you find her as an illustrator?
So I had gone on a vacation with my family and had ran into someone I went to high school randomly on the other side of the country. And I was talking to his wife, and she was like, I wrote a children's book. And I was like, how did you find an illustrator? I'm just struggling. Like, I've kind of just done some like online and like nothing just like is grabbing me for what I envisioned for the book. And she's like, I actually found my illustrator on Instagram. And I was like, oh, that's an interesting place. And so honestly, I just typed in children's book illustrators, some of them come up. And my wonderful illustrator, Ellie, I saw her page and I just started looking through her illustrations and I was like, yes, that is my illustrator. That is how I envision my pictures to look. And I reached out to her and she had an opening starting in that next month. And I was like, put me in, book me. Because I wanted her to definitely do my pictures. And it was, just that professional and friendship just evolved from there. And it's been such an awesome process with her. And she started to actually send me illustrations for book 2, which is so exciting. And she's just so wonderful. And she's actually based in England. So that's been a little bit interesting with the time difference. But I was telling her that once, our first 3 are out, I love to take my daughter out there and go visit her. And so we could actually meet in person. That would be a really neat experience for us.
That would be so neat. So, what are some things that you have been doing for marketing for your children's book?
So, because I was not really in a rush to publish this book, I didn't have a deadline. I took the time because she took about 6 months to do the illustrations because they were all hand drawn. And so during that time, I really tried to educate myself as best I could for self-publishing world, the marketing world of books, because it was a field that was so new to me. And, your podcast was one of them I listened to, and I would just listen to podcasts as I was, cleaning or going on walks just to like let myself or be more aware of the ins and outs. And so, the number one thing I know is like, okay, I need a website for my book. And so I started creating that. And then I'd also started to, just do some like social media posts prior to it coming out. And then the one thing I really wanted to do was a book launch. And so I actually did a book launch at a local bookstore in town, which was so cool. To just have people in the community come out and support me and the book. So that was really important. And then like trying to also have a strong presence on Amazon and making sure, I had an author central page set up and making sure I did my A+ content, because with picture books, if people can see a little bit more of the illustration, it hopefully would be more convincing to them to buy, the book. And so trying to make sure I was established in each of these different places prior was so helpful to me. And knowing that I was not in a rush, I wanted to take my time and do it right. And so that I think was very beneficial so when I launched on February 6th, I had quite a few people already excited about the book. I had people wanting to come to the book launch. I had people from that couldn't come to the book launch able to buy it on Amazon. So I think like I tried to set myself up for when that February 6th date came, I was ready. And then now it's just trying to continue with that momentum. It can kind of be the tricky part, and so, trying to be present on social and, trying to do Amazon ads and all those different things, because it's such a competitive market of, trying to be relevant and trying to make your book stand out just a little bit more.
One thing I hear from many, especially indie authors, is the community has been really helpful. Has that played a part in your experience?
Oh my gosh, yeah. And that was going to be one of my things that I said, like, as a new to the, book world, publishing world, is just to make sure you reach out to fellow authors, because I am so glad I did. I've gotten so many ideas, so many like just try this, that kind of thing. And just even just, you can do it kind of encouragement, which is so helpful, because I think it can be a little daunting, at times. And I've, established some great friendships with people all over the country, just kind of supporting each other, supporting one another's books, and it's not a competitive thing. It's a, like, I'm going to support you with your book. And you can support me with my book, that kind of thing. And I think that's the really cool part about the indie world, is that it's so supportive of each other and it's so welcoming. And I feel very lucky that I have started to establish some of these friendships, because it can be a kind of lonely, when you're trying to figure this all out on your own.
So I'm going to ask another fun question. Right now, my kids love monster. There's a monster in your book, and there's a dragon in your book, and we have to read that like literally every single night. Is there a favorite children's book in your house right now?
Oh my gosh, my daughter is going to be 2 next week, and she's really into the Sandra Boynton books. She really loves all the Little Blue Truck books. Oh my gosh, she also loves the Gruffalo. And it's so funny because my nephew is actually like kind of afraid of the Gruffalo, but my daughter will like turn to the page of the Gruffalo and like always point at it, and like she'll give him a kiss. And I think she's the Gruffalo's biggest fan. But it is also kind of neat because she'll like actually pull out my book and be like, Mama, like she knows that I wrote that book, which is like also really special to me. And one of like the main reasons I wanted to publish this book was for her, and that she could, pull that book out at nighttime to read. But those are our current favorites right now. And Good Night Construction Site. She loves that one too.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, but I do truly appreciate it. But one thing I do want to ask before you go is the question I ask everybody. And what is one piece of advice you would give to a not yet published author?
I think especially for a children's book author, is that you set a budget for illustrations. I think especially as a self-published author, you are the one who's kind of taking on those costs. And so I think going in with, okay, I know I want to spend this amount for illustrations is a good, thing to have, just so you don't kind of overwhelm yourself with you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't anticipate these kinds of costs. Because like it's kind of like starting a business, you're the one who is putting this money up front. So I think that would definitely be one of the things I would recommend, just making sure you set yourself a budget. The other thing is just kind of like we mentioned earlier, is just reaching out to other authors. I would think I was kind of hesitant at first. I was like, they don't have time for me. And people are so amazing and welcoming and want to help and want to do everything they can to help you be successful. And just kind of my last thing is just learn as much as you can. Knowledge is power. And especially if you're coming from a field that is different than publishing a book. The amount of hours I listen to podcasts, but I learned so much. Those would just definitely be my top things that I would recommend.
Thank you again, Jillian. I really do appreciate it. And I also
Thank
want
you
to
so much for having me. Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, you're good. You're good. So I also would like to thank my listeners. If you're interested in her book or want to follow her writing journey, all of the links are in the show notes. If you enjoyed this episode, you might also enjoy my interview with children's book author Mark McCraw, where we talk about marketing children's books, or my interview with Saloni Sura. She is the author of one of my kids' favorite chapter books, Flora Investigates the Missing Egg. And if you have been listening for a while and have not already, I would appreciate if you press the like and subscribe button so it tells others that this is a podcast worth listening to. And again, I had the privilege of talking with Jillian Fanning. Thank you very much. She is the author of Giraffe in the Forest, a Jeff and Banks adventure. Another one is coming out this summer, which is when this one is actually airing. And you can follow her writing adventures at jillianfanningbooks.com. Thank you so much, Jillian.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us in Authors Alcove, the Writing Corner. We hope today's discussion has inspired and informed your writing journey. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review to help us reach more writers like you. And remember, we are brought to you today by the letter S, as in Scrivener, your partner in crafting and organizing your story. Again, if you would like to support me through Patreon, that is always appreciated. You can find both of these links in our show notes. You can also listen to us at Authors Alcove, the healing place, where authors share about their books on healing and recovery, or Authors Alcove, the reading nook, where we talk about fantasy, sci-fi, and the occasional horror. Until next time, keep writing, keep creating, and we'll see you back in the writing.